We usually think of music as a personal sanctuary and a tool for emotional expression, cultural preservation, and artistic beauty. But beneath the melodies lies a harsher biological reality. Sound is a wave of kinetic energy. It exerts a physical force on the human nervous system, and when that force is stripped of its artistic context and applied maliciously, it can have devastating results. For decades, intelligence organisations and military forces have understood that the human psyche can be far more vulnerable to auditory disruption than it is to physical force. This realisation birthed a dark subfield of psychological warfare, known as acoustic harassment. It is the doctrine where pop culture icons, heavy metal tracks, and even children's television themes are stripped down and rebuilt into instruments of state terror. Welcome to Glass Gekko, where I analyse the cultural and psychological effects of music history. To understand how popular music transitioned from the radio waves to the theatre of war, we must look back to December of 1989. The United States had launched Operation Just Cause, a military invasion of Panama designed to depose the country's de facto dictator and former CIA asset, General Manuel Noriega. As conventional American forces closed in, Noriega fled to the capital city and took political asylum inside the Apostolic Nunciature, or the Vatican Embassy. Under international law, the embassy was sovereign Vatican territory. United States troops could not legally breach the gates to arrest him without triggering a diplomatic crisis. The military was stuck in geopolitical stalemate. They couldn't use bullets, so they chose to use speakers. The operation was designated Operation Nifty Package. The US Army's 4th PSYOP group surrounded the embassy with massive commercial-grade multi-directional loudspeakers. Initially, the objective was tactical encryption, blaring static noise to prevent journalists with directional microphones from eavesdropping on the tense negotiations. But the mission rapidly evolved into an aggressive experiment in psychological attrition. Intelligence profiles noted that Noriega was a highly sophisticated classical music enthusiast, partial to grand operatic compositions. The PSYOPs team decided to use this to their advantage. They began broadcasting a relentless loop of rock, punk, and heavy metal directly at his bedroom window. The operation was a primitive experiment. They blasted Guns N' Roses, The Clash, Black Sabbath, and Van Halen for 3 continuous days and nights. However, the operation was almost too effective. The ear-splitting volume didn't just target Noriega, it drove the Vatican staff insane too. In response, the Holy See issued a blistering diplomatic protest directly to Washington. George Bush intervened, ordering the military to silence the speakers after 72 hours. National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft would later reflect on the incident as a low moment in US military history, criticising it as silly and undignified. However, the psychological damage was already done. The 72-hour assault, combined with total political isolation, shattered Noriega's remaining resolve. And on January 3rd, 1990, a broken man clutching a Bible walked out of the embassy gates and surrendered. Panama proved the concept. Music could be used to fracture a target's psyche. The US had the blueprints. This was no longer improvisational battlefield theatre, it was a codified doctrine. In 2003, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez officially signed off on the authorization of auditory stimuli as an approved interrogation tool. To achieve psychological capitulation, interrogators utilized a neurological phenomenon known as auditory driving. Tracks like Metallica's Enter Sandman or Nine Inch Nails' Mr. Self-Destruct are ideal for auditory driving. They feature hyper-compressed audio levels, harsh distortion, and rapid, aggressive tempos. Because the human ear cannot adapt to or predict the chaotic frequencies of heavy metal, except for these psychopaths, the auditory cortex is forced into a state of defense. Over 40 continuous hours, this constant sensory friction causes a complete neurological collapse, manifesting in acute hallucinations and severe spatial disorientation. However, the intelligence apparatus discovered that aggression was not the only way to break the human spirit. Often, the most effective auditory weapon was something even more terrifying. Interrogators frequently deployed the Barney and Friends children's theme song on an endless loop lasting for days at a time. In the field of interrogational psychology, this tactic is categorised as the deployment of futility music. When a subject is forced to listen to a hyper-simplistic and cheerful melody thousands of times in succession, the brain experiences a profound form of cognitive dissonance. Well, unless you're one of these sociopaths. There is a violent mismatch between the bright infantile safety of the music and the grim reality of the dingy interrogation cell. This psychological state induces learned helplessness, a clinical condition where a human being perceives that they have absolutely zero control over their environment. Once a prisoner descends into cognitive apathy, their emotional defences disappear, leaving them completely compliant and begging for escape. Perhaps the ultimate paradox of weaponized music is that the songs used by the state to enforce compliance were often created by anti-establishment artists who wrote them to protest that exact type of authority. A strange sort of countermeasure which I mentioned in my anti-war songs video. When the declassification of interrogations revealed the specific playlists used in these operations, it triggered backlash from the music industry itself. Bands like Rage Against the Machine and Nine Inch Nails spoke out in disgust upon discovering that their art, that was built on themes of liberation and anti-authoritarianism, was being used as a weapon by the state. Canadian artist Skinny Puppy discovered through verified accounts from former Guantanamo Bay guards their complex and distorted electronic tracks had been used extensively during black site interrogation sessions. The band was deeply offended. Not just morally, but financially. The government had taken their intellectual property and turned it into a weapon, all without license. Instead of releasing a standard public relations statement, they fought back using the bureaucratic language of the state. They drafted a formal commercial invoice totaling $666,000, sending it directly to the United States Department of Defense. The invoice demanded full payment for unauthorised musical services rendered, explicitly citing copyright infringement and the illegal commercial exploitation of their music. Whilst the Department of Defense rather predictably ignored the invoice, the band's legal defiance exposed the events to the broader public. The history of weaponized playlists served as a stark reminder of the dual nature of sound. The exact same acoustic principles, rhythmic sounds and frequencies that have the power to heal, inspire and unify communities can also be systematically flipped to degrade and isolate, breaking human beings. It proves that music is not merely a passive form of entertainment. It is a pretty profound, raw and volatile force of nature, and in the hands of those who understand the science behind the airwaves, a playlist can be just as formidable as any gun or nuclear bomb. If you want to learn more about the psychological and cultural effects of music history, be sure to click the playlist on screen at the moment, and be sure to follow for more videos like this one. But for now, I've been Gekko, and thank you so much for watching.